These were attacks by the Islamic Republic of Iran on commercial shipping on the freedom of navigation with a clear intent to deny transit through the strait. There's no doubt. The intelligence community has lots of data, lots of evidence. The world will come to see much of it. We don't want war. We've done what we can to deter this. The Iranians should understand very clearly that we will continue to take actions that deter Iran from engaging this kind of behavior.
That was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo assuring there is additional proof linking Iran to attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman last week. Some U.S. allies, including Japan and Germany, have requested stronger evidence than the video released by the Pentagon appearing to show an Iranian patrol boat removing what is said to be an unexploded mine from one of the ships. Meanwhile, the Associated Press reports this morning that Iran says it will break the uranium stockpile limit set by Tehran's nuclear deal with world powers in the next 10 days. Speaking live on state television, a spokesman for that country's atomic energy also warned that Iran has the need for uranium enriched up to 20%, which is just below weapons-grade levels. The Trump administration pulled the U.S. out of the Iran deal last year. Joining us now, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, Ben Rhodes. Great to have you back on the show.
Be with you, Mika.
So, Ben, a lot to talk to you about. We'll start with Iran and then go on to Hong Kong. What's the impact of Iran breaking the uranium stockpile limits?
Well, what it shows is that the European efforts over the last year since Trump pulled out to keep Iran in the deal are beginning to unravel in the face of Trump stacking up sanctions on Iran, designating the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. The Europeans were trying to coax Iran into staying in the deal, I think probably at least through the U.S. presidential election. This shows you that the political winds in Iran are shifting, and the hardliners there are saying we need to do something in response.
Now,
to
is this because the economy continues to go down because the sanctions really are having a big impact?
Yeah, I mean, the promised goal of President Rouhani in negotiating the nuclear deal was to relieve pressure on the economy. Instead, he got an even worse economy because of the sanctions that Trump has stacked up since the deal. The problem is, this is what we always said, is you either have a nuclear deal like the one we negotiated in place, or you're stuck in a position where Iran is once again escalating its nuclear program, and we have to make the choice of whether or not to use military action. And unfortunately, because of how Trump has handled this, we're dealing with this situation completely isolated from our closest allies in the world.
Well, and also, I mean, because how Trump's handling this, but also you look how the Iranians have been behaving across the region, how they've been acting across the region, something that the president and you both said this nuclear deal is completely separate from their other actions. But what does it benefit Iran to continue to stay outside the realm of the respected world community? At what point does somebody inside that country say, let's try another way. Let's work to get these sanctions lifted?
Well, the problem, Joe, is that they tried that. So Rouhani and Zarif, the foreign minister, their argument was, let's try another way. This hard line we're taking on the nuclear program is not working. The fact is, Trump said that not only would leaving the Iran deal put us in a stronger position to pressure them on the nuclear deal, he also said it would change their behavior in the region. And we've seen the opposite, actually. They've continued and even escalated, potentially, their behavior in the region, and now it looks like they're restarting their nuclear program. So this maximum pressure campaign that they've had with Iran isn't working. And again, you have a binary choice. Do you try to negotiate a diplomatic agreement with Iran, or do you go down the path of escalation that risks a very significant war?
But let me follow up with that question, because yes, they agreed to the nuclear deal. At the same time, they were still causing trouble throughout the region, which leads to the bigger question, which I always love asking because nobody seems to have the answer. Maybe you do. Who's in charge of Iran?
The Supreme Leader is in charge of Iran. But what happened while we were in office is the pressure of sanctions and, frankly, their own mismanagement of the economy rose so much that a guy like Rouhani came into the presidency and was empowered to negotiate this deal. And the problem, Joe, is this gets to the fundamental credibility of the United States. For years, we negotiate with other countries, all the major powers in the world, these limits on the Iranian nuclear program. The Iranians agreed to them. If the U.S. then comes in with a new president and just decides to break that, that completely isolates a guy like Rouhani at home, empowers the hardliners there who say, see, we were wrong to trust diplomacy, and then leaves all of our allies fuming at the fact that we have precipitated a crisis that the Iranian nuclear deal was supposed to avoid.
There's this sort of bizarre checks and balances system there where you have Rouhani,
Yeah.
you have the supreme leader, and then you have the Revolutionary Guard, who sometimes seems to be independent players themselves.
Yes, and essentially what we saw is competing power bases underneath the Supreme Leader. We had the Revolutionary Guard over here, and you had Rouhani and Zarif over here, trying to at least pursue a path of engagement with the West. And everything that Trump has done has contradicted his aims, because it's empowered the worst people in Iran, who are quite comfortable being in a conflict position with the United States, an adversarial position with the United States. That's where they've been for the last 30 years. And unfortunately, again, it leaves us with bad, even worse options than we had before.
So Secretary of State Pompeo and the Trump administration are saying that Iran was behind these attacks on the oil tankers. Some U.S. allies are suggesting they need more evidence of that. But what can they do? How can they press the U.S.? And what do you think of what you've seen so far?
Well, first of all, nobody should be surprised that this is where we are. When you have an administration with this degree of a credibility gap, allies are not going to trust you in your first proclamation of what happened in a complicated situation like these tankers getting on fire in the Straits of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. The reality is, when Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement, he lied about it. He said that Iran wasn't complying. That was his rationale for months. He refused to certify the Iran deal, even though Iran was complying. So he has a credibility gap on issues related to Iran that the Europeans have confronted him on in the past. What this means is, if you really want to pin the blame on Iran, you're going to have to do extra due diligence. You're going to have some kind of international investigation. You're going to have to present this evidence at a forum like the United Nations, and that's not how the Trump administration operates, and it means that we're isolated in trying to pin the blame on the Iranians.
Yamiche.
The president has said that because he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, that is effectively done. That even though other nations remain in the deal, is the president right in the fact that by default the deal basically is done because the United States has pulled out?
Well, he's right in the sense that the United States is not living up to our obligations under the deal, right? So we are not providing the sanctions relief that the Iranians were supposed to get under what was negotiated. The Iranians have done everything that they were supposed to do in terms of rolling back their nuclear program, submitting to inspections, shipping out 98% of their stockpile. Now what the Iranians are doing after a year of the Europeans saying to them, work with us, let's see if we can continue to resist the imposition of new sanctions, stay in the framework of this agreement. It's still technically on the books, right? It still exists as something that was negotiated among the 6 major world powers and the Iranians, and the Iranians have apparently reached the limit of their frustrations. Now, what's interesting is they're not just tearing up the deal. They're not kicking out all the inspectors. They're not restarting all of their centrifuges. It seems to me that they're testing how far can we go. We have to do something to respond to what Trump has been doing for a year, so we're going to start by testing the limits on this enriched uranium and see what happens. I think that's a very dangerous place to be, because you're caught in a cycle of escalation. And escalation in the Middle East, as we saw with these tankers, can lead very quickly to shooting.
So, Ben, put us in the White House Situation Room right now, if you could, in the minds of President Trump, Pompeo, and Bolton. What is their end game? What do they think is going to be the outcome of the policies that they are pursuing with Iran?
Well, this is a very important question because nobody knows, right? Because Bolton and Pompeo, if you look at their history of the things that they said before they were in office, it suggests that they want a military conflict with Iran. They want a regime change policy with Iran. Then you have President Trump, who's been very belligerent in his rhetoric to Iran, but has said he doesn't want a war. Here's what concerns me. For 6 months, we've had no Secretary of Defense. By all accounts, by all reports, Jim Mattis, who was no softie on Iran, right? He was blocking some of these more belligerent moves. He opposed pulling out of the nuclear deal. Ever since that Secretary of Defense chair in the Situation Room was vacated, you've seen this ratcheting of tensions. It strikes me that they don't want somebody in that chair who's going to push back, because the Pentagon knows how serious a war would be with Iran. So in the Situation Room, what I think the main story is you don't have a Secretary of Defense and haven't had one for 6 months. I think that's unprecedented in our history. It doesn't get a lot of attention. But what that's doing is allowing Bolton and Pompeo to take over and completely drive this policy, and I'm afraid that could lead again to a real war.
So, Ben, briefly before you go, some fascinating developments in Hong Kong. Just a little more than 30 years after Tiananmen Square, we weren't exactly sure how Beijing would respond, but actually they backed down, and even after apologies from the Hong Kong government, protesters still spilling out into the streets. What's happening?
I think this is inspiring. I think this is good news. What we've seen is, for several years, the Chinese try to essentially eliminate the de facto autonomy of Hong Kong, eliminate civil liberties in Hong Kong. The final straw here was an extradition law that would have said if you get arrested for a crime in Hong Kong, you could be brought to mainland China. And if I'm sitting in Hong Kong with some relative freedom, I'm thinking, well, the Chinese have a surveillance capability. They can see my social media, my emails, and I could end up in a Chinese prison for something I post on social media. What we don't know is how the Chinese will respond. They're more likely to pull back and wait and try this again. But for all of us who care about the contest between authoritarianism and democracy in the world, what we learned again in Hong Kong is human beings would rather be free. They'd rather not have a boot on their throat. And that should be inspiring, and frankly, we should be supporting them. I don't hear that from President Trump, but I hope that we will.
Yeah, it's a great moment. An absolutely great moment.
Ben Rhodes, thank you very much. Good to have you back on the show. And still ahead, President Trump has been focusing his recent attacks on Joe Biden, but his campaign may be turning its attention to another 2020 candidate, Senator Elizabeth Warren. She made her name attacking Wall Street, but can her economic plans set her apart in a crowded Democratic field? We have new reporting on that next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.